Hey guys, it's Kevin here. As promised, I'm making my fishing tips for carp and catfish today. I'm probably just gonna get through this one since I don't have many tips. Since I don't really need to. I just don't think about catching them. I just do. So I'll give you the tips that I think are most important for catching those fish, and what kind of techniques that you use to bring them in. I guess. So we're gonna get this started right now. Okay, I'm back after like I don't know a few hours. Yeah, the camera angle changed a little bit because my phone is at 10%, so I'm charging it so I can make this video. So the video idea was I'm gonna tell you guys some techniques and some tips of catching the bottom feeders that I fish for. So we're gonna start off with the carp. What I like to do when I fish for carp is most of the time the first thing I do is I walk around the area where I'm fishing. So what I do is I carry some corn with me the whole time, and I have my little pocket rod, and I have my little pocket rod with me as I'm walking around the spot. And if I see some carp, I'll chum the water with all the corn that I have with me. So I just take a little handful and just throw it in there, and then after I do all of the chumming and scoping out for the fish, I take a piece of corn, no, maybe 3 or 4 pieces, and put it on one hook. If I have a treble hook, I'll put maybe 3 on each hook, and I'll just cast it out there. I put a little, maybe 3 lead sinkers on the, maybe like those little split shots, and I put those maybe halfway from the hook to my, like the ending eye on the rod. And I just cast that out there and put on a little Y stick, and then after that I just make sure that it's secure, and then I run back, grab the rest of my stuff, and just wait until I get a carp. The next thing that I like to do is, like I said, I use those little split shots, like that big, depending on how many you want on there or how much weight. Like split shots come in different sizes, so you can have a decent sized split shot and still get enough weight for maybe 3. So I just like putting 3 on there so then I could tie them off and so they don't fall off. The next tip I have for carp is when you're bringing them in, don't horse them in, because your first carp that I had on, I horsed it and broke the line because they're strong fish. They're not weak. So what you're going to want to do is just have a light, make your drag like light, so when it runs with it, it takes the line, it doesn't snap it. And then you're going to have to be very, you have to think when you're reeling in with these carp, because what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to go in the weeds and stuff. You're going to have to try and drag them out of there, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll go into, okay, so say I'm on the bridge where I caught the bullhead in my first weekend video. If you want, you can go back and look at that video. But there's a channel, and there's a ton of weeds. And what the carp do is when I'm fishing there, they'll swim right into the weed beds, and they'll wrap the line around and just pull it right off. Because some of those weeds are like really the roots are really deep in there. So the carp will just get right off using the weeds, or maybe a tree fell down and the branches are sticking out of the water. It'll wrap the line around that too, and sometimes it'll just cut the line. So you got to be really careful when you're fishing and you get a carp on. And the last tip that I have is when you're netting the carp to get a nice picture of it, or maybe keep it, you're going to want to have a landing zone, even if you're netting it or not. Because if you don't have a landing zone, the fish could, like I said, just wrap itself around some weeds. And making a landing zone, I already explained that in one of my other videos, but I'll explain it here too. Making a landing zone, you're going to want to have a nice cleared area by the water. And you just want to make it like a little ramp, so it'll just slide right up. And that's if you don't have a net, but if you have a net, you're just going to be very good with that net, or else you'll spook the carp and it'll just break the line right then and there. Okay, so the next fish I'll be talking about will be catching catfish, and techniques and tips that I have. So when you're fishing for catfish, well, when I'm fishing for catfish, is the first thing I do, I make sure that I have a good a good sorry about that, is that I have a good strong hook, like maybe like one of those octopus hooks, like if you know what I'm talking about. It's like kind of looks like that, but it's looks like a circle, kind of like an octopus circle hook. Yeah, way to go. Um, I make sure I have at least 3 of those, because what I do is I make my own rigs. So I'll have, this is how I determine how big the rig will be. Most of the time my rigs are probably that big. And what I do is I put one hook on, obviously that okay, so the rig's this big, I'll have a hook here and a hook at the end. Then I'll have a hook, maybe since it's about that big, I'll have a hook there. And then what I do is I put sinkers here and here and here. Because when I catfish, I catch myself a shad. That's also another tip, is before you go catfishing, the day before, or maybe like 5 minutes before, it doesn't really matter. I prefer some fresh shad, so if I get the idea of going catfishing while I'm fishing, I'll just go down to the creek and catch some shad. But what you're gonna want to do if you want them like frozen, so they're more preserved, you catch maybe a dozen shad the day before, and put them in a nice freezer bag. Make sure they're like spaced out, if you know what I mean, so they don't freeze together. And then that day, you're gonna take them out and let them thaw. But don't let them thaw too much, or else they'll really start to smell. So maybe a few minutes before you go fishing, just take them out so they're still like frozen, and then stick them in your tackle bag and get out there, because they're gonna start to smell if they really thaw out, and it's a mess. And so I'm gonna get back to my rig. I have my three circle octopus hooks, or whatever. I'll have to look at the name. I have them in my bag. And I take 3 of those, and so what I do is I take my shad, maybe the shad's like that big, and I'll cut the head and the tail. So I'll put the head on the first hook, the abdomen or the stomach, and where all the intestines are. I'll take that and put it on the middle hook, and then I'll take the tail and put it on the last hooks. And nothing really goes after the tail, unless like maybe a bass or what else? Maybe a big bluegill will go after the tail if it's a small shad. But I usually get my shad like that big, because catfish, if you want to catch a big catfish, use some big bait. So that's another tip. If you're targeting a certain size for a catfish, like out in Brunswick Lake, there's really not much of a scale with the catfish. Since you're fishing for bullheads most of the time, they'll range from like that to maybe that. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter how big of a shad you're using. But say for my uncle's lake, there are some pretty big catfish in there. So what I do when I'm there, I go and I catch myself a bluegill, and I do the same cuts. But I don't use a rig that I do for bullheads at Brunswick Lake, because the catfish there are much bigger and more aggressive. So I just take a big old bass hook, like you used to rig up plastics and stuff, and I just take that and put it on there, and then I put a sinker about halfway up, and I just whiz that out there with a bluegill on there. Or maybe, like I said, the day before, I'll catch some shad, and I'll put a frozen shad on there. And here's where the smell comes in with the thawing out shad. When the shad's thawing out, like I said, it'll start to smell. And when it starts to thaw out underwater, it'll really start to smell. And then it'll start to sink to the bottom. So that's a really good thing, because when you're fishing with normal shad, or maybe a bluegill too, the smell will start to die out, since the water will just like overwhelm it and be absorbed inside the fish. So I just like catching my shad before when I go to my uncle's lake, and I freeze them, and then they start to smell when they're at the bottom of the lake. Another tip and technique kind of thing is when you're fishing for the catfish, what you're gonna want to do is with the catfish, they're gonna fight. Like, it's gonna be a big fight with the catfish. So you're gonna want to have your line all tensed You don't want to have any slack, like any fish. You don't want any slack because they could just pop the hook right out of the mouth. So if you keep it nice and tense, it'll keep that hook set in the side of the mouth real, like I said, it'll keep it tense. And if the catfish have any slack, they could break the line and they just pop out the hook. So if you keep your line nice and tense, odds are you won't lose the fish, and it'll be a nice fun fight with catfish, since it's pretty much tug of war until you get them up to the surface. Well, not surface, but kind of the shore. Because then when they get to the shore, they'll start to swim back into the water. And when they're in the deeper water, they'll pretty much try and stand their territory. So that's where the tug of war thing comes in. So that's fishing for catfish and carp. That's what I'm thinking whenever I fish for those fish. So if you like this video, comment below if you want what other fish you want me to tell you about, like techniques and stuff. Go watch my last video for I think it was me comparing my fly rod and my bags. And while you're at it, just go watch all the videos. So that's all I have to say. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and as always, Kevin's Fishing Adventures signing out, and keep fishing.